not sure about these adjectives I'm using, but like, I'm just kind of it's like the conscious versus the instinctual.
So, I mean, I think about a few things when you talk about that stuff. I think, part of it just goes philosophical for me because everything that I learned about music was that, music is a celebration, right? Music is, even when you're talking about the saddest piece at a funeral, you're commemorating a moment. You're paying honor and respect to something, right? And so there is an inherent joy, I think, in that, right? In the fact that we have music at all, right? So I mean, that's kind of philosophical. But on the flip side of that, I've always been drawn to darker things. Like, when we're talking about like songwriting and what the subject matter is, usually the most depressing, sad music, that's, just so completely dark. That's the stuff that would speak to me, So like all this being said, one of the things that I really love about working with the modular, and this is kind of borrowing from a book called Art and Fear and how the writer was thinking about sculpture. But in the book, it said that art is not the creation. Art is not the idea. Art is the tension that exists between the idea that you have and what is actually in front of you. Wow. Right. And so that idea resonated with me for a long time. And I think that modular does that to you without you. It's like, there's no way around it. Right. So you have to have an idea, because if you're just playing around, it's like a wilderness. You have to have some intent. Right. I mean, at least you can do a lot of experimenting, but you have to be deliberate. Right. But after a certain point, things are going to surprise you. So there's this constant conversation of, this is what I think it's going to sound like. Oh, and this is what it actually sounds like, right? And you can get close a lot of the time, but that process is, I think, where a lot of the unknowns come out. But they're not really unknowns. They're just the dormant stuff that you're not really intentionally putting out there. You're just allowing it to kind of come out.
Awesome, yeah.
I know that was a very long-winded
answer. I mean, I love it. I mean, you pretty much covered like half of the questions I already.
Well,
so I'm just gonna kind of bullet point through some questions.
Fire away.
Cool. Introduce yourself.
My name's Jan Falmagne. I'm from New York City, and I'm a musician, composer, and teacher.
What have you been listening to recently?
A mix of stuff. Let's see. I've been really into James Blake, going back and forth with like some of his piano music, and some of the first two records I still have an affinity for, and I have them on vinyl, so I've been putting those on. I've also been into, I don't know if you know this artist, Datashi. It's like D''ATACHI. He's got a new record out. I think he's got a few out now. Always dug his stuff's amazing. It's kind of similar to the music that I'm making here. It's maybe a little bit more aggressive, but I think that you would dig it.
Hell yeah, awesome. All right, well, you kind of already covered this, but maybe in fewer words or more words, whatever. Why modular?
I think, why modular? I mean, the short answer is there's more possibilities, and it's less predictable, so you end up with more happy surprises, right? I think that's generally the short answer, right? But, if you want a little bit more of a, why does this exist now? Why does this system that's this small, like, why does this fit in my studio?
Right, that's what I was thinking. It's small.
Yeah.
No, that's not what I was thinking.
This would take up, an entire wall of this studio. There's no way I could fit this much, this many modules in a room like this if it was the, old size 1/4-inch jacks, like an original Buchla or Moog modular.
Right. And that's a Eurorack setup.
Yeah. This is all Eurorack.
And is that I'm not like super knowledgeable about the stuff. What are the two prints? Is that the dominant system of modular setups is Eurorack?
Yeah, I mean, yes. Nowadays, yes, by far, Eurorack is the dominant one, and I think it goes back to the '90s. So basically, right, you know what happened in the '90s? Autotune was invented. A lot of things like that happened, right? And I think that was the real start of people pushing away from computer music, pushing away from doing everything on a laptop, right? So what was once really convenient and awesome that you have all the sounds, all these instruments in your computer is now this sort of like it's like instant song. Doesn't feel organic. It doesn't. There's something lost in the process. And so I think Dieter Doepfer inventing the Eurorack system. It's a simple idea and it's brilliant, right? You just replace all the quarter-inch jacks with eighth-inch jacks, right? And now the electronics have moved along, with what do they call it? Surface mount technology, right? Rather than through hole boards. Like if you look at a PCB nowadays, it's all those flat resistors that are like flush to the edge of the green board. So those two things in combination allowed everything to just get really small. And so once you put a low enough price point on that, all the musicians in New York, all the people that are in the cities that could never have the space or even the money to put together a big modular system were psyched to jump on board. And then all the other manufacturers just jumped on, and the rest is history. Now it's an explosion.
So it's almost like there's the practicality of it. It's funny that you mentioned, because we were talking, we were kind of joking around on like the systems and like living in New York. It's like it's not like you have all this sprawling space for this stuff. So it's like smaller, more economic. Cool.
Yeah,
all right.
That's absolutely a huge factor. Just the practicality of it and affordability of it. It gave a lot of people access.
Yeah, and affordability in this instance being a little bit of a fluid term.
Well, yeah, absolutely. I mean, comparatively, like
comparatively,
when we're talking about like I think 60 grand was like the Moog system that George Harrison bought to do when they brought back to do the Abbey Road album. Yeah. Right. And that was 60 grand in whenever Abbey Road came out, right? More than 50 years ago. So
adjusted for inflation, 150 grand.
Yeah, adjusted for inflation, that's a lot of money. When you're looking at something like this, it's less than 10 grand in there,
I was going to ask if you're comfortable sharing about, give or take, that system right there, if somebody were to assemble that. How long you been assembling that unit?
It took me almost a full year. It took me about 8-10 months just to get the cases. I think I feel like I'm a lot farther along. Like I'm basically done building. There's a couple of other things that I want to do maybe with this system. But I think there was a lot of trial and error for me. I had to do a lot of stuff and then, say, no, that's not working. I want to change it.
Very cool. So yeah, short and dirty version of that particular patch. What were the main modules you used? How did you, simple, kind of straightforward. What were the materials?
So I have two sequencers in this rack. I have a Winter Modular Eloquencer here, and the drums were done on this, as well as the bass. The melody itself was done on this Fraptools USTA sequencer. So this has some really great probability features and ratcheting features. And I love using those for drums because electronic drums, you end up with loops. They sound stiff. A real drummer would improvise, create variations, fill in. And so the Eloquencer is really great for that. And the USTA sequencer is really nice for longer melodic lines because you can make the stages any length. You can think like an instrumentalist. You can think, I want that to be a quarter note in this scale, and for so on and so forth. So that's where it started. The drum sounds are coming from a Erica Synth's drum sample. I love the converters on that. They're super punchy and not very hi-fi. And let's
not
see.
Very hi-fi.
Yeah, not very hi-fi, but
they're not lo-fi. They're not very hi-fi.
Well, people love MPCs, right? People love like SP1200, right? Those are all machines that in their day were pretty groundbreaking. And part of it is the low bitrate converters. They're punchy. You sample something in there and you play it back, and it's just got this bite to it that cuts through the mix. And that sampler does it, and nothing else does. So I love using that one for drums. Let's see. What else? be honest, I don't know if I even remember the whole patch.
That's what I was asking. I was like, this is gonna be like, this was like a month ago that you did it.
Yeah. I mean, I can probably say a little bit more about like the approach. I remember you saying like maybe it could be something more industrial or more gritty, and I was thinking about the melody a little bit more, right?
Okay.
So I started by just sitting at the piano and playing through the song, and just kind of getting a gist of like, okay, does this melody work? Like, what? Like, can I change these chords at all? Right? Because going, rock and roll, when you have power chord riffs, the quality of the chord is ambiguous, right? So not hearing the thirds, when you take it over to another instrument, you can kind of make those choices or leave them out.
Yeah.
So that's where I started. And then programmed the melody into this, and just started copying it over and devolving it, just like making variations on it. And that sequencer is awesome for that.
Together. Concerning the power chords, the rock and roll, that it did struck me. I'm like, okay, well, you filled out the harmony a little bit. So that was the you, right? That was the Jan in the music.
Yeah, that's one of the things about me. It's sort of one or the other, right? I either need harmony that's interesting or a groove that's, that sounds amazing, right? And if I don't have harmony, one or two of those, then the music's not going to grab me, right? So, when we're talking about rock music, harmonically, not that interesting, right? It's kind of the same riff over and over again. So for me, I just kind of felt like, if I make some choices here and make this a little bit more sound like a stock progression, then I think it would be a little more color to it, more possibilities.
Yeah, colorful, I guess, is the word that we'll be using a lot today. But it is. It's very colorful, both literally and musically. Do you think modular synthesis will ever make its way into the lexicon of composition the way that like more conventional things such as orchestra, chamber music?
I think it already has. I think it's already there.
But like to a degree where it become more or less ubiquitous. I mean, in my master's degree, we had like they had a modular setup, but it was sort of peripheral. Like, yeah, if you want to dick around with it, you can, but it wasn't like
right.
It wasn't like it wasn't like it, we still, it was like what chamber music are you writing? And I suppose like if you went in and said, no, I only want to do like work in the world of like synthesis, I imagine there'd be a lot of composition teachers that would be like, well, why are you here? Like that's that, you know what I mean? Right. And do you think it's a generational thing or yeah?
I think it's a lot of things, and I think the film industry is playing into it a bit, right? Because when I went to school, you could study your instrument, right? You could do a performance major. If you did composition, you could either do composition or you could do contemporary writing and production, right? And the difference was contemporary writing and production, you'd get to work in studios, you'd be writing short jingles, things like that. And then there was a separate synthesis major where you would study, how to do stuff in computers, how to build stuff, how to program synths, all that stuff. But it wasn't really integrated into a program, right? Where like, I want to be able to make compositions to film and I want to use synths doing it. Well, you'd have to dual major to do that, or you'd have to buy your own synths, right? And I think what we're seeing sort of similar to that pushback from, in the 90s, getting away from auto-tune and, canned music. And, in the 90s, there was a lot of reality TV. And so studios were putting out these TV shows as cheaply and as fastly as they could. And so there's a lot of canned music, right? Instead of writing to picture or having an actual score, they just hand the editor, a licensing service and say, here's your library of, 1 million hours of audio, chop it up and put it there. And so that was the score, right? And I think now we're starting to see film composers writing stuff to picture. Like I'll hear synthesizers and, not all the time. Sometimes it'll just be like a theme song in the intro. I've definitely seen films where you can tell it's written a picture,
Right.
So I think that they're here. It's sort of like there's probably still two camps. I think people that are really invested in orchestral composition, that are trained instrumentalists. There's a little bit of a wall there, right? Where some of this gear, if 10 years ago, none of it would be designed with the same terminology and the same language that we use, right? So, you having a composing background, you would know how to, for example, analyze chord progressions in a key, how to understand whether something is the root or the third or the fifth of the chord, things like that, right? None of those terms would be used here. And they, now they are, now I can, like, for example, this Sinfonium is a German machine that just came out. And it does all that work for me, right? But, this is a brand new thing. You can actually think, the way that I was trained as an instrumentalist, I can think that way when I'm trying to put together melodies and harmonies. But a lot of these guys were just essentially doing it, by ear. Just throw it up against a wall, see if it sticks, sounds good, drop some drums, great, there's a track. So I think you do have two camps that are really coming at it from two completely different things, right? A lot of the modular guys come up from like being DJs and being in that kind of electronic music scene, whereas so basically the guy that's trained in orchestral music probably doesn't DJ, right? And the guy that's DJing the parties probably doesn't sight read very well, right? So I think those camps are still finding a way to sort of meet in the middle, right? To meet the demands of these consumers that are more and more diverse.
Cool. Love it.
Yeah,
so I'm trying.
Rambling, so.
No. I'm just resisting the urge to like egg you on and then continue the conversation because I'm like, okay, time. You know what I mean? Like
I'm good. I have time after this. If you want to go on a little longer.
Yeah. I love hearing your thoughts. Okay. Do you think when you're working on, and we sort of touched on this a little bit, when you were working on this particular patch or this, do you think of it as a recording or as a performance or a little bit of both? And talk like about sort of the real, you said that there's ways to create self-playing patches, but like how much of the because you sent me, it wasn't like you had one take and then you let me do that take and change this one tiny thing. It was like multiple takes all had these sort of varying components that have different sounds. So in terms of like the medium of recorded music versus like the medium of music performance, sort of what does that relationship look like?
Yeah, there's a lot that I can say about that there.
I'm
sure. So just in terms of approaching on modular, that's another benefit that I feel like I've gotten from working with modular is you cannot be anal. You cannot be a control freak. There's no way, So if you're the type of guy that's used to, let's do 30 takes and let's edit it all together, you're gonna have to let go of that type A personality, or you'll never get anywhere. You'll get lost or stuck on the modular, right? So that kind of set me free a little bit, and I've had to be. So when you said, is it a recording? No, I've actually had to be disciplined about recording everything, because what I would do when I first got into these systems was I would wake up in the morning, be super psyched that I had a modular. I'd go downstairs and I'd play with it for like 2 hours, and then I would go and make lunch, and I'd be like, that was cool. I wish I saved some of it. And I did that for like a year before I actually was like, no, you have to click record before everything.
Because the external hard drives start piling up.
Yes, they do, but it's worth it. It's worth it. And that's kind of what, so when you said, is it a recording? No, it's sort of like the recording is something that I remind myself to do to capture the spontaneity, because that's where the magic is, right? If you start recording when it sounds good, you've already missed it.
I love that so much. I mean, I think isn't that there's like, it's like the three, I guess in my experience, it's always, I'm like when I finish a performance, particularly if it's like if I was conducting an ensemble, I think to myself, I'm like, man, that rehearsal we had last week was kind of better.
Right.
I'm like, man. But, right. Also that's the I'm just to sort of harken back slightly what you said. I like this thing of this type A personality that you can't. Are you a type A personality? Did you have to? Was that a learned behavior? You seem to allude to that a little bit.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think, absolutely. I was a type A personality when I was younger. I was pretty anxious, pretty wanting to control a lot of things in my music, right? And that taught me that I was doing those things in my life, right? And so, you know, the same approach with modular there. I think that type A personality works really well for a lot of people, for a lot of roles, right? You know, engineering, for example, right? Nowadays, you
the guys who build the machines.
Yeah, well, you know, in the old days, it was the analog tape, or right. So there was like this concept of non-destructive recording. Yeah, no, that wasn't a thing. So it was like this cowboy bravado, right? It was like, okay, we're going to do it again. We're going to do it. It's going to be better. We're going to do it right now. Because if you didn't have that, you're potentially destroying the previous take. So if you didn't have that confidence, you couldn't bring the level up, right? So nowadays, there's this sort of OCD mentality of let's just make sure all the hard drives are triple backed up and make sure you get 60 takes of anything. Completely changes the vibe of the process, right? So, you know, that little bit of tension of like, I'm not sure what's going to happen, that brings the level up. And it brings the level up in live performance, right? I had a friend that I would work with, whose name I won't mention. He would get pissed if we would over rehearse. So we would start working on a tune, and the moment that I was like, I think I got the form. Is it this many times on the way out? He'd be like, nope, we're done. I'm not playing it again. And it used to really frustrate me until I understood that if you over rehearse, nobody's listening. Right? If everybody's a little bit uncertain about what's going to happen, it brings the level up because you have to pay a little bit more attention. And the same thing goes on over here, right? The fact that there's some stuff going on that you maybe don't understand, right? Some voltages flickering around, you can't see what they are unless you check them with the scope, right? The fact that there's, you know, endless modulation points, you could just plug anything in anywhere, so many possibilities, and it's unpredictable. You know, so going back to that sort of first idea that I was talking about how art exists between the space between intention and creation, right? It's not the object, it's not the idea, it's the struggle between the two that actually creates the art.
Wicked. Short and succinct benefits of modular versus the pitfalls. What are the pitfalls? What are the limitations? How do they enter? You know, like the pros and cons.
I think one of the main pitfalls to watch out for is there's a tongue-in-cheek term, Eurorack, because people start spending their rent money on modules, right? And you start buying stuff you don't need because it's so exciting. And so that's one of the main pitfalls is you know, do I really need this? Right? Are the instruments that I'm working with actually limiting me in a way that I want to push past? Because that's really the only reason to get into it, right? If you feel limited by your other instruments, because as you can see, I have keyboard synthesizers. You can see the corner of a piano over here. They make great sounds when you just play them. That's fine. But there are certain things that you can't do. So you know, that's the main advantage is nearly infinite possibilities. It was described to me, you know, when I was kind of first getting into this stuff as like, you know, keyboard synths with presets are kind of like airplane flights, right? You push a button and you pop up in a different place, right? Modular is like the Appalachian Trail. You pack up all your bags, you pack up your gear, and you hike for a day. And then you set up in camp. You're on top of an awesome mountain. You're wherever you want to be. But you're there for as long as you're there. And if you want to move, you got to pack up all your bags and go somewhere else. And there has to be intent there. There's a little bit more of a situation in which you are going to enjoy your experience and your surroundings more, right? When you're on the plane, you're just kind of looking at your phone. I just need to get there. You're not noticing all of the things on the way, right? So that's the trade-off. It's easy to fall in. It's very easy to just play. You know, if you make a deep enough system, you just start having fun, and before you know it, you're just playing with wires, and no music is coming out. So, you know, diving in and coming back out with something that's like, yeah, this sounds like music to people that aren't synth geeks. That's part of the challenge.
Yeah, I sort of on that. I do that sort of meme of like the synth nerd who is like tracks, music, albums. What? I don't know what any of that means. What is that?
Right.
I like this analogy of the airplane and the Apple. Actually, that's beautiful. But with that analogy, you know, there is, I forget the group. There's this track. I don't remember who wrote it. It's called Preset Junkie, and it's like sometimes you do just want to get somewhere just because you want to be there. What would you say to that?
I would say absolutely. Going back to, the only reason to get into modular is if you feel limited by what you have. All of those synths that have presets, it's not like you can't look out the window on the airplane, right? You can. It's all there on the way, right? But you're just way more likely to miss it, So yeah, I think there's something about not having preset buttons on a keyboard. It forces you to interact with the instrument in a different way, right? But presets are absolutely valuable and useful. There's a ton of reasons. Even just let's just say performance. That's enough to justify presets right there, right? But even in production, if you're depending on what your goals are for the day. Right. If you're not sitting here by yourself making an experimental piece of music and you're trying to actually produce something, there's a lot of, you can just push a preset that's close to the sound I want. Let me go back and fine tune it later. There's tons of reasons to use presets. They can become like crutches though. So that's kind of the trade-off.
Yeah, I've had something I have my students do is a number of my students are using Logic Pro, and so when you go into the empty channel strip and then you just like load, even if it's just like a string and any of the VSTs. So as a student, and I know that they're kind of new, and then they like open up, and then I look at their session, and there's like buses and sends and all these other plugins, and I'm like, did you put all those there? They're like, and I'm like, in my head, I'm like, no, you did not. That's all there. And so what I have them do is I have them dissect and then recreate it.
Right.
So that's what I like the preset system for. Is it's almost like you reverse engineer it, and then I've learned so much just from doing that. Like, how do I mimic this sound? And I like get in, and same thing with presets. Even I'm like, okay, this sound, how is it made? And then as you kind of go backwards, you learn, and you're like, ooh, and then you can make the changes, and then you're like, oh, it was a vague idea of what I wanted, and now it is actually what I wanted.
Yeah, that's great, and I think if you go back to like the '80s and the early days of MIDI, that was a major learning method for a lot of people because we had these MIDI librarian, MIDI editors, right? So you could dump your patches and you could see what all the settings were, right? So I think that was a major learning tool for a lot of people to just take a preset and then reverse engineer it and figure out why does it sound this way, right? So, that's fantastic. But you can see how a student who's approaching this, who doesn't understand anything, right? And they see a menu. That menu is a barrier to learning, right? Because if you can just go down and go vocal and it sounds good enough, you're never going to go in there and understand what the EQ is doing and why that makes the vocal sound good, what the compressor's doing and why that makes the vocal sound better, what else you have on there, whether you have de-essing, harmonic excitation, whatever. You're never going to learn about the bits and the nuts and bolts of what's actually going on, right? So that's my main, I guess, disclaimer or warning about, presets. Like, caution, may stop you from learning anything beyond this.
What does a modular setup offer that a DAW simply does not?
Well, I think the first thing that probably every modular owner is going to tell you is sound quality. When you just working with real analog oscillators and stuff, even from your keyboard synths, they sound different. And second thing is tactile control in a different way. So that's a little difficult to explain if you've never experienced it. It's kind of like, when you're turning knobs on an Ableton controller, you get, you feel the encoders click, you see the knobs move on the screen, right? But when you're working with the synth, similar to if you're working with outboard gear, right? Engineers that are working compressors and running stuff through patch bays are going to understand this too. There's a point where you feel what's going on under the hood, just like driving a car, right? You feel where the engine is and where that rate, is where you need to shift into that next gear. There is a sort of non-visual connection there that you can sense. And I think that when you start to have that with an electronic instrument, computers are going to feel stale.
Yeah. I think that's especially resonant with instrumentalists in general.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like,
it's real. You can touch it.
These goofy, there's nothing wrong with them, but like electric violins, like, to a concert.
They're all the rage now. Yeah. There are a ton of them.
And and I've played some of the best electronic piano. Nord is pretty much a staple as far as like electric piano keyboards. They play beautifully. I've played beautiful, like, I guess, well, that's a keyboard, but like electronic pianos or whatever. But like when I, even sometimes I'd rather sit at a somewhat out of tune old Baldwin sitting in a practice room because it's still a piano, and that's that tactile thing that it's almost like the unexplainable, that little X factor, or just that little. And I do, and from my own experiences, that's what I, my modest setup, but I like touching and moving things. And I love not being at a computer, I guess, is really how much time do we spend
getting your eyes off the screen. The more you're looking at meters and screens, the more likely it is that you're not listening as well.
Totally. So that's,
I know mastering engineers that have racks of compressors and all the VU meters have tape over them.
Oh, really?
Yep.
That's
because
awesome.
I don't want to see. If I can hear it, that's enough. And if I see that meter could be calibrated off, right? My eyes are going to start to tell me something, and I'm going to trust this instead of this.
Yeah.
And that's backwards. You should be trusting this over this.
Yeah. I find that super true in like when notating music. Like if I'm looking at a score I'm working on, I become fixated. I'm like, okay, it's not involved enough. It looks, the performers are going to be bored playing these lines, or like this, or like these rhythms are too simple. I have to, and because I'm stuck on, like, I'm looking at the notation and I'm like, I'm hearing it and I'm imagining it, but I'm sort of like, I can I just look at the, can I just turn and just sort of, close my eyes and listen to, what is the clarinet going to be doing or something, and it is that visual. It's such an interesting thing. Or, in the DAW situation, I'm like, oh, my automation track is lacking. I better automate things for the sake of automating things. You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah, we get into that, like use it or lose it kind of mentality where, got to use everything, otherwise, why have it? And I think that, we talk about technology and how this is kind of maybe the impetus or the source of this problem, but it's not a new problem. The idea of too many choices and the concept that limiting those choices will help you as a composer is very old, right? We go back to Bach writing a piece using just the 4 letters of his name. Why do that? Right? Why Brad Meldau prefers playing over standards, even though he's improvising all the time. It's the structure, it's the limitations, and then your ability to work within, through, or whatever you're doing. That's what kind of it challenges you to rise above those limitations and what your normal sort of like stock things would be. And it changes the output so that it's not going to be the same experience the same way by the listener. Yeah. So I think that whole concept of what kind of constraints can I put on myself? It's like Houdini, right? Let me chain myself up and find a way out, and that's a way to find something new.
Mm-hmm. Although Houdini died doing that.
Yeah, he did.
That's all right. Modular synthesis, is it a labor of love?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a decent amount of, well, actually, so okay, to answer that question, like it does take a little bit of learning and a little bit of work to like build the system, but it's actually not that hard, right? It's more intimidating. It looks more intimidating than it is, right? At the base of this, to install one of those modules is essentially like plugging a cable into an outlet and then screwing in 4 screws.
Right.
That's it. The difference is that the outlet is on a green board, and the green board has exposed stuff, and then
which freaks people out.
White, or it's a ribbon cable that has like a weird connector on it. But that's it. You plug it into the power, and you mount it to the board. So I think it's maybe intimidating a little bit more than laborious, right? So once you have that down, and you're sort of like, okay, I know how to assemble a module, then okay, you got to understand a little bit. You got to know what you want. So yeah, it is a little bit more of a to do than a lot of things. So if you're looking for instant music, yeah, not the way to go. If you're
right,
if
yeah,
you're,
that's
you're the
right.
person that's like,
I
want to take this home and make tracks with it right away. You're probably going to need some practice and a few more modules before you do that. But that investment in time will pay off in spades, because I could sit down here and make 3 songs a day now, right? And I'm essentially improvising the whole time just until I find something cool, right? And that process feels really organic, really relaxing, really cathartic. So that investment in time, it feels like I'm recouping it in spades now.